Welcome to Undergraduates Rising in Support of the Environment, or URISE. My name is Casey, and I'm a nursing major at URI, graduating in winter of 2020.
My name is Kaylee, and I'm a cell and molecular biology major, graduating in May of 2020.
And my name is Katie, and I'm also a cell and molecular biology major, graduating in May of 2020. And each episode of URISE will start off with what we call climate change by the numbers, where we will report an interesting statistic relating to climate change.
Our statistic for today is that 13% of Americans have little to no confidence in scientists. This number came from an article in the New York Times called "So You Want to Convince a Climate Change Skeptic," obtained from a Pew survey in 2019.
This could cause us a lot of problems later in life, particularly in America. Because if people don't trust that climate change is an issue, how will we ever make the changes necessary to combat it?
So before we continue, now that you know a little bit about the topic that we'll delve into today, we are an honors program class of students taking a course on global climate change at URI. So we discuss in-depth topics of the effects that climate change is having on the world today and the science behind it.
Our goal is to educate students and others that are part of the URI community and beyond, to teach them the impacts of climate change on themselves and inspire and educate them on how to make changes in their daily lives, on campus and beyond.
So we want to discuss an online survey that gauges the thoughts that people of many ages and of many different communities have towards climate change. This survey is 231 responses from various ages, genders, and communities. It was anonymous and voluntary, shared on social media platforms and through email.
The first question that was asked on the survey was, what is the first word that comes to mind when you think about climate change? And the majority of responses said words like crisis, scary, inevitable, urgent, anxiety, fear, danger. And that was to be expected. And while we do agree that climate change is definitely a scary thing, we hope that the information we provide in these podcasts will help you better understand climate change and how and why we need to act in the future to avoid extreme effects on our lives.
Additionally, a lot of responses were weather, unusual weather patterns, and temperatures. So we thought that it would be beneficial to open our podcast by explaining the difference between the words weather and climate. While they are similar, they do not mean the same thing. Weather is atmospheric conditions that are local and over short periods of time, such as minutes, hours, and days. However, climate is more of a long-term, regional, or global average of temperature, humidity, and rainfall over seasons, years, or even decades. A good way to think about it is that weather is what you wear each day, but climate is all of the clothes that you keep in your closet.
Another important distinction to make is between global warming and climate change, which were two responses that we also got in the survey. So global warming is an increase in Earth's average surface temperature since the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s over a very long period of time, whereas climate change is change in weather patterns that define local, regional, and global climates over a long period of time.
Some of the responses to this question were also carbon, emissions, and greenhouse gases. So we thought we would let you know a little more about those components of climate change. Carbon is at 413 parts per million in our atmosphere as of February 2020. This is the highest it has been that we have seen since human inhabited the Earth. On a graph, you can see that when we hit the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric carbon spikes upward at a much faster rate than beforehand. The Earth did have a level of carbon close to this before, but it was way before humans inhabited the Earth. And during this time, the Earth was full of volcanoes and was much too hot for us to be able to survive on.
A few more responses we received included oceans, Antarctica, polar bears, ice caps, wildlife, and rising sea levels. Climate change does affect all of these things, which our later podcast will discuss more in detail.
And the last words that we got as responses to the first thing people think of were things like scam, myth, false, and controversial. These show that people have many different viewpoints regarding climate change, and we hope that our podcasts can show people whose viewpoints are similar to these about why climate change is a real and pressing issue in today's world.
The second question on the survey was, do you believe climate change is an issue now?
The results showed that most people do believe climate change is an issue right now. In fact, 73% of the 231 responses said they strongly believe, and while only 6% of people disbelieve that climate change is an issue.
So these numbers were really hopeful to me since the majority of people are in the belief that this is an actual current problem, which doesn't necessarily reflect most of America's belief, where there's a lot of controversy on the matter. I think that people in the 6% that strongly do not believe are among those who have trouble believing because the visual effects of climate change are not concretely visible to the average person, like rising average temperature and melting polar ice caps.
Following the previous question we asked, do you believe climate change will be an issue in the future?
So 2.5% of people disbelieved this, while 84% strongly believe this.
I thought these results were really reassuring that people at least acknowledge that we are on our way to a point of no return in regards to climate change, that it definitely will be an issue in the future. But I think the one issue with so many people thinking that it will only be an issue in the future is for how long will people consider climate change as only a later problem? At some point, it has to be an issue of the present, and action needs to be taken to change our ways.
We also asked on the survey whether people currently took action against climate change.
Only 15% of people who answered this question said that they do not take action against climate change, which was a really great result. We will discuss things that you can do to take action against climate change in later episodes.
So I think there's a common misconception when hearing about massive industries having such a great effect on climate change that people themselves cannot have a great impact. So this podcast will help those people understand that they can make as big of a change as they set their minds to. However, like Katie said, these numbers mostly lean towards action, which is great to see.
The next question was, do you think your actions can prevent climate change?
About 5% of the respondents said no. 10% were not so confident. And we'll discuss later in a podcast how the ways we act moving forward will impact climate change immensely.
These numbers were really positive to me because if people believe that they can make a change with their small actions, then they're more likely to do it. And if we can find a way to motivate them, then hopefully we can all come together to make a change.
Next, we asked, do you think your community does a good job educating its members about climate change issues?
So the response of people who believed that this was not true was very drastic as compared to the other side. So we hope that our podcasts serve as a way to educate people in many different communities.
And we hope that the people who listen to our podcast can then go and share what they have learned with other people in their community. And hopefully, overall, we can have more educated communities on the topic of climate change.
The next question we asked was, do you believe your community makes an effort to act in an environmentally friendly way?
It appeared that generally people were not so confident in their community doing so. 40% of people rated a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. 25% leaned a little towards their communities not doing so, and 25% leaned a little towards their communities doing so.
I thought it was interesting to see that there was an even split both ways, looking at communities not doing enough versus doing a great amount. But it definitely wasn't shocking that most communities are somewhere in the middle. I think it takes a lot, especially for towns or communities with already tight budgets, to make fighting climate change a priority. They do enough for it to reflect positively in the public environment as politicians, but it could always obviously be more. It's also important to remember that the answers here are people's opinions, and everyone has a different standard about what enough effort in their community is.
Absolutely. And we also asked, in your opinion, in your belief, climate change affects, and we gave these people several answers to choose from.
It was great to see that many people checked all of the choices on the survey, which included daily life, natural habits, physical and mental health, living below the poverty line, and a few others. Only 64% of respondents checked the healthcare industry. 68% checked that climate change would affect mental health, and 70% of respondents checked that climate change affects those living below the poverty line most.
It was really interesting to see how some things are well known to be affected by climate change or are really obvious, like the economy or natural habitats, while other things are affected by climate change, but people don't really think about that. So our following podcast will cover how all of these things are impacted by climate change. So if you'd like to learn more about some of those less known categories, you can stay tuned to learn about it.
So these categories moving forward in our future podcasts will include climate change basics, daily life, impacts on both mental and physical health, natural disasters and their impacts on habitats, views around the world, and how the coronavirus has impacted climate change and the environment.
Each podcast will end with a bit that we like to call little doses of hope. At the end of each podcast, we will leave off on a positive note with a thought on how to make a positive impact yourself.
So we hope that our introduction to URISE gave you a good sense of what is to come in our next podcasts. And our little dose of hope today is to continue to watch all of our podcasts, to stay educated so you can treat the environment the best you can and understand why it is always important to do so. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
Thanks.